So in understanding ethics, it's important to understand about philosopher Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes said it well when he said, "No arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." This presentation will be an in-depth talk on some of the research that's been done around Thomas Hobbes as a philosopher, and you'll be provided with a short profile of who he was, his philosophy as it relates to ethics and morals, and his stance as it relates to a couple of modern-day issues. So Thomas Hobbes was an English philosopher of the 17th century. He was best known for his book Leviathan and his political views on society. He was born in England in 1588 and was well known for his views on how humans could thrive in harmony while avoiding the perils and fear of social conflict. His experience during the time of upheaval in England influenced his thoughts, which he captured in The Elements of Law, Deceive or On the Citizen, and his most famous work, Leviathan. Hobbes worked as a private tutor for various wealthy and aristocratic families. Hobbes entered circles where the activities of the king, members of parliament, and other wealthy landowners were discussed, and his intellectual abilities brought him close to power. Through these channels, he began to observe the influence and structures of power and government, and in 1640, Hobbes wrote a piece defending King Charles I's wide interpretation of his own rights, and royalist members of parliament used sections of Hobbes' treatise in debates. This treatise was circulated, and The Elements of Law, Natural and Politic became Hobbes' first work of political philosophy, although he never intended it to be published as a book. Hobbes had a reputation in many fields: mathematics, especially geometry, translation of the classics, and law. He became well known, notorious in fact, for his writings and disputes on religious subjects. He was also respected as a theorist in ethics and politics. So now that we have an understanding of who Hobbes was, let's get an understanding of what his viewpoints were. So Hobbes' views were based on the natural condition of man, the goal of all humans being to get and keep as much power over others as possible. It was a natural desire based on the fear and lack of security. Basically established that there was a social contract with common rules that everyone should follow. So Hobbes' work later inspired John Locke, Immanuel Kant, and many other philosophers. So Hobbes' philosophy is based around the fact that the quarrel or conflict that arises between people in a natural state is caused by three things: competition, that puts people at war with each other to gain each other's possessions; diffidence or fear, that puts people at war with each other to defend their own territory and possessions; and glory or pride, that puts people at war with each other to maintain other people's respect. In such a state, no such thing as justice or injustice. There's no concept of right and wrong, no law, no pleasure, no leisure. People are free to look after their own interests with regard for anyone else. Violence is common, and the interests of the strongest will prevail. According to Hobbes, people live in continual fear and danger of violent death. The life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And in order to secure peace, people must sacrifice much of their liberty to act on the condition that everyone else will do the same. We have to give up our right to do whatever we wish in order to demand the same sacrifice from others. To transfer our rights means to give someone else the power to act on our behalf. This is Hobbes' preferred social order. To renounce our rights means to enter into an agreement with others that equals whereby we accept the constraints upon our actions as we demand that they accept ours upon theirs. So this contract is the mutual renunciation or transfer of rights. Having entered into it, our greatest moral obligation is to keep our promise and abide by it. And the restraints that we must agree to be put on our behavior to live together peacefully in society are the tenets of enlightened self-interest. So Hobbes' tenets are essentially 8 points, which are to claim as much liberty as we are willing to grant others, to keep promises and perform contracts for which we have agreed, to acknowledge the equality of all, do not demand of things that we are unwilling to do ourselves, things that cannot be divided should be shared in common, people who disagree should submit their dispute to arbitrators, judges should be impartial, and we should not do to others that we wouldn't want them to do to us. And although we are agreeing to consider others and avoid doing any harm to them, even when our interests are in conflict with theirs, we are still acting out of self-interest. Enlightened self-interest is unique among other theories because of its outlook that people adopt moral behaviors only in order to escape anarchy and agree to be only as ethical as is necessary to live at peace with each other. We are no better than we need to be, and only because we need to be. And the biggest gains that are experienced from enlightened self-interest are peace and security, because people are acting in their own best interests while following the rules. So there are a few strengths and weaknesses to Hobbes' goals. So some of the strengths are that Hobbes observes that all individuals are to be considered equal and have the ability to pursue their own interests as long as it does not intentionally harm others. This gives members of society more freedom to pursue their own goals. Now, Hobbes' views do have some weaknesses as well. His views place much reliance on government and officials. The purpose of government is to enforce law and serve the common protection of society. As mentioned, in Hobbes' tenet, judges should be impartial, but often this is not the case, and the strongest or richest individuals are favored. Bias, prejudice, and other emotions and feelings can cause unfair judgments. Now let's examine Hobbes' view on civil disobedience. So, Thomas Hobbes would not have supported civil disobedience. This is because Hobbes' philosophy is based on trying to create a perfect state. The restraints he set out were for people to follow in order to create the perfect state and not to have people at war against each other. The restraints were part of his social contract called enlightened self-interest, where people can make decisions to better themselves, but they must be within the rules that have been set out. If people began straying from these rules, there would be unrest, and people would start believing it is every man for himself, and would strive for personal power without giving any thought to the people being negatively affected by their choices. So now let's examine Hobbes' position on the death penalty. So Thomas Hobbes would support the death penalty for the act of murder because committing such a crime and causing deliberate harm to another human being is a breach of the agreed upon contract and falls outside of the restraints set by his philosophy. Individuals who breach the contract and are found guilty of murder are dealt with by the law that represents society. According to Hobbes, each subject authorizes, or is understood to have authorized, the sovereign to punish him for transgressing the law. Thomas Hobbes writes in Excerpt 6 from the Leviathan, in chapter 13, of the natural condition of mankind. The passions that incline men to peace are fear of death. By entering the social contract, we are agreeing to transfer our rights with the understanding that all members of society do the same. It is then up to the government to enforce the rules placed on society. One of the 8 constraints that Hobbes claims we must agree upon is we should not do to others what we would not want them to do to us. Analyzing this, one could argue that a murderer is expectant of the death penalty as an appropriate punishment. The other side of the argument is that the government should not take another's life into their own hands. Hobbes argued that the punishment for crime must be greater than the benefit that comes from committing the crime. However, Restraint 7, judges should be impartial, causes a great degree of debate over the death penalty. It has been proven that convictions of the death penalty have been racially motivated. As well, defendants who are not wealthy and cannot afford a good lawyer are not subject to a fair trial, because they are appointed a public defender as compared to someone who can afford a good lawyer, who actually cares and invested in the trial and in winning the trial. In conclusion, Thomas Hobbes' philosophies inspired many other philosophers. Sacrificing the liberty to act on the condition that everyone else will follow suit is critical to the social contract. The 8 restraints allow everyone to live peacefully under the social contract, where we avoid doing harm to others. Under the philosophy, Hobbes' followers have more freedom to make choices than under any other ethical theory. In light of the information you've just heard, you can now decide for yourself whether you agree or disagree with Hobbes' philosophy. Thank you for the opportunity for us to share our short profile of philosopher Thomas Hobbes with you.